Howdy, welcome to another little episode of Shed Manufacturing. Today is just going to be a pretty small update on Project Lincoln, and this isn't a Ford 9-inch. It's a Ford 9 3/8, which Ford, Lincoln, Mercury decided to make for an 11-year span from 66 to like 77. And that was to deal with the big 462 big blocks that they were starting to put into these massive cars. So they just wanted a little extra protection for the ring and pinion exploding, which we all know is a very big issue with Ford 9-inches. So anyway, while I was off camera for most of it, I went ahead and pulled this pretty much completely apart, got it nice and tidied up, getting ready for some chassis black on it to clean it. Got new bearings pressed onto the axle shafts, got the axle shafts all cleaned up, they're ready to rip. Got the rear brake plates for the drum brakes stripped, need to get them tidied before those go back on. And I got the 4-link brackets welded onto the OEM rear end. So what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to mock this rear end up in the car and articulate it through its range of suspension and figure out what in the chassis we have to cut out in order to be able to lay frame on 20s, because if we're not laying frame on big wheels, what are we doing? So I might not reassemble the whole thing just for mock-up purposes, but I just couldn't justify bolting the brackets on instead of welding them when I have a welder and it's stronger than bolts and they never come loose, and unless they crack, but that's my welds don't crack. So I figured we'd go ahead and get these welded on so that way I could put this nice clean rear end up into the back of the car without having to get myself filthy every time I touched it with trying to figure out clearances, what needs to get cut, what not. Anywho, this will get put back together. We'll get the Lincoln back on the lift. We'll start chopping out the top of it, start figuring out what we need to do to put big wheels on. Thanks for following. Right, welcome to the underside of the Lincoln. So we got the rear end mocked up. Obviously there's no pumpkin in it or axles or anything like that. So we're just getting the housing squared away. And there's a couple of problems that I bumped into, which I'll demonstrate. So as we go to lift the axle up, as if the car was getting lowered down, a couple of things that I don't love happen. One, in order for the binding of the upper links to be reduced, the lower links here have to be pushed quite far out and the upper links have to be quite short, and that tilts the rear end very far forwards. And the other thing that I don't love is that we're not quite low enough yet. So the way we're going to be able to do this and lay frame is by cutting out this section of metal to allow the rear end to go up further. So as you can see on this side, this is just a thin flange. It's only sheet steel. From where you're looking, you'll only see the flat part of it. That's all we have to cut out to be able to put this all the way on the floor with 20-inch wheels. But it's not that much work to cut the rest of it out and install the supplied C-notch, which would then let us lay all the way down to a 22-inch wheel, which I don't really plan on doing, but it's nice to know that I could, you know. And the additional labor now is very small, but doing a C-notch into a frame of a car that's painted and on the road is a much bigger ordeal. So I think I may start by cutting out this little flange, seeing how that helps us, and then going from there, seeing if our upper link binding gets worse. If it does, then obviously there's not a whole lot of point in making the body possible for us to lay 22s when the links won't even let us fully lay 20s. A solution to combat this could be to relocate the upper links. I could add on some metal onto the brackets on both sides and raise them up an inch, and then raise up the links at the car side 1 inch. That would hopefully keep the geometry pretty much the same. As long as you keep both sides the same amount of up or down, it's more or less the same. So that's a potential to reduce the binding, but I'm not entirely sure. This is my first time making a custom car that lays its frame on the floor and stuff like that. So we're sort of learning together. Right then, quick update on the rear end housing that we're modifying. So here we have marked out where the upper control arms are in line with this when it's fully compressed. And if we zoom in right here, right there on both sides, you can see the paint scuffed. And that's because when this gets all the way tucked up into the chassis, those control arms contact it. What we are going to do is scallop this area out between these two and just take some metal out. What I may do is go all the way through and then just weld in a piece of pipe. So that way the control arms, when we're fully aired out on big wheels, will lay in this little valley right here and not interfere with us getting low and also having a good pinion angle. Okay, a little update. So we have the axle nice and zeroed out, nice and level on the countertop, and so this is the untouched control arm, and you can see how it's resting on the axle housing right here. And on this side, we've gone ahead and cut away a decent amount, and we'll go ahead and plate that from the back when we're done making our grind. As you can see, with that leveled out, we have a good little bit of drop. Now that's a little more than 1 1/4 inches. That'll allow us to tuck the axle another 1 1/4 up into the chassis, meaning that we'll be able to comfortably lay frame with our 20s. Right then, so we have our holes that we've sanded and ground into the axle housing to give our control arms additional reach down. So that poses a couple of little issues really. Primarily, all of the diff fluid will splash out of them, so we've got to find a way to plug them. So what I'm going to use is some 1/8 inch bar stock. I don't know what this is from. It's an old project that I obviously heated and bent that for some reason. What's past is past. I'm going to chop it off and probably heat it up again and bend it, so that way it fits to the contour here, and then I will bring it up from the bottom and then weld it in, making sure to keep the bead below this level. I don't want to go to all the trouble of making this bevel cut and then just fill it back up with weld. I want to make sure that it is nice and flush and nice and low. And I did a quick test with an axle in here, and there's absolutely gobs of room. If I'm bending this axle housing, then I have more issues that I need to attend to. I need to stop jumping a lowrider. So yeah, I'll get these plugged. I'll get my bits cut out, get them plugged, and we'll get these welded in, and then I can final paint that. And as soon as that's done, we can clean out the inside of this and populate it with the center section and the axles and the brake backing plates. And honestly, we could probably throw the brakes on there. But more importantly, that means that we can get wheels on this thing and it can actually roll around the shop without me having to put it on casters. And then we can figure out how much of the trans tunnel we have to cut. Because with this pushed all the way up into the body, there's not a real straight line between where I think the pinion yoke is going to be and where the transmission is going to have to be. Let's see. Okay, so I jumped ahead a little bit here, and for that I sort of apologize. So we went ahead and got these all cut in. We got the new pieces of steel that I mentioned earlier bent, formed, and welded in under. The welds aren't pretty, so I went ahead and painted them over before showing you. So this is all ready to go back into the car at this point, and we can go ahead and put the center section in, the brake plates and the axles, and then we can get this car rolling on its wheels again. Okay, so you know I don't really like to do you guys dirty and all like old 2007 Spike TV style where I just gloss over a whole bunch of work and then act like it just happened magically, because it doesn't. But I'm gonna do it. Hammer. Oh, that's not right. There we go. That's all mashed down. Excellent. So we got the rear end back in, and you guys have seen me do that enough by now that I figured I didn't have to record it. And then I went ahead and put the brake backing plates and the axles in. I did that twice because I did it the wrong way round the first time, because there's a long axle and a short axle, and you'd think there'd be a 50-50 shot, but not if you overthink it. Then you're almost guaranteed to get it wrong. So now we're ready to do a brake install and rebuild all of the drum brakes that are in this, but I really can't be bothered to do that right now. I want to do sort of bigger jobs with the sheet metal side, and messing around putting brakes on, it's fiddly and I'm lazy. But what I am going to do is install the brake drums. They're ugly and they'll get tidied up when I do the brakes later, but for now they'll be just fine. They'll sit on there, and mostly what having the brake drums will do is when I put the adapters on for the wire wheels, it'll provide the correct spacing that is going to be on here from factory. So that way when I'm deciding if I do or don't need to tub the rear, I have an accurate idea where the wheel's going to sit. So let's get the brake drums on, get the adapters bolted on, get some wire wheels in, and then sort of see how this thing looks out on an actual axle instead of just stuffed on the ground with a couple wheels under it. I think that about wraps it for this episode. We set out to get the suspension in and get it sorted out so that way we could lay frame. We pretty much did that. We're able to get the rear pretty ignorantly low, and the front definitely lays frame with tires and a little bit of weight in the nose. In order to go lower in the front, I think I'll have to space the upper control arm because the ball joint angle is getting a little extreme. And obviously a bigger notch in the subframe up front and cut the bag perch down a little further. The rear, I think, is pretty much where it needs to be. I'll be welding the C-notch bracket into them in the next couple videos. I'll probably get to that at the same time that I address the tubs. I think I'll go either a 1 or a 1.5 inch wheel spacer all the way around to try and get a little bit more aggressive fitment, and that'll probably introduce some wheel to inner wheel well issues. Not the skin outside that you see, but the inner wall will probably have a little bit of a fitment issue with a 1.5 inch spacer, so I'll either have to power hammer that in, or I'll have to just cut it and weld in a new tub. I might just make a slice up top, push the steel in, and then weld a strip in on each side to try and retain as much factory material as possible. I'll burn that bridge when I get to it though. For now I need to get some tires, so that way this doesn't roll around in the shop on the rims. But I think next video is going to be getting the engine and the transmission mated, because we got the adapter plate that finally arrived. I'm thrilled about that. So I'll be able to get the transmission, the engine in, figure out where they're going to sit, because of the front sump of the engine is going to dictate a lot of how far back we can push the engine without goofing around with rear sumps and nothing like that. So we'll get the engine in, and that'll show us where we have to cut the transmission tunnel to fit the back of the transmission, and then that'll show us where our drive shaft's going to be and dictate how much of the tunnel has to come out for that. I don't want any of the components for the engine or the transmission to hang below the frame rails, so a lot of that's going to have to get tucked, and that'll probably wind up happening with the floor coming up. Well, follow along, it should be a fun one.